Welcome back, guys. In this video I'm going to go over how I make a harness. I'm going to show you some of the things that I use and some different tips and tricks that I've picked up over the years from different people and just experimentation on my own. To start with, I'll start with a Ghost controller. This is the V2, so this should pretty much become the standard here soon in how I make my controllers, at least. I also will use my power savers. This is the box for it. These are the power savers themselves. We'll go into a little bit more detail on how that works. I do have a couple videos showing it, but basically this is going to stop addressable LEDs from killing your battery. Some of the builds that I use have several meters of LEDs, addressable LEDs in them, and can be pulling several amps when they're running, and even when they're off, potentially up to an amp just sitting there. That's going to kill your battery pretty quick. So the power saver is awesome because it will disconnect all of that when the car is sitting, and then when somebody goes to go for a drive, the alternator has more than enough output to keep that battery charged and make sure that the lights can run. So it just brings a lot more practicality to addressable, eliminates one of the bigger issues of the potential for dead batteries, especially if the car's sitting. A lot of the smaller builds you won't experience as much of an issue. If it's something you drive every day and you've only got like a halo and a strip or something, you probably won't notice the issue. But if it's something that sits for long periods of time, even several days, or some of my builds in general, will probably kill your battery in a day if it was just sitting, drawing power. The power saver eliminates that problem, gives you those super nice builds with tons of LEDs, but also prevents you from killing your battery. So I got those. Some other things that I use. I am currently still using these barrel connectors. I just really like the simplicity of them. They're really easy to run if you got to run them through the car or something like that. They're super sturdy because they're factory molded, so you know you can't accidentally rip the wires out on them. They're really simple to assemble. There's two arrows and they just slide in together, and then you screw them shut, and they're waterproof, so you have nothing to worry about there. So I like the simplicity of them. So currently that's still what I'm using. I will also use cable glands. I use that coming out of the controller itself so that I can pot it. The way these work, it actually works really well to just pot the two controllers and then stack them. The way the power saver box is, it fits just perfect on top of a Ghost controller. So that ends up being my whole controller right there. Power saver, everything all included, and the wires come out and go to each headlight, and just keeps things really somewhat compact for what it is and simple. As far as inverters go, I'm actually currently installing inverters inside of the lights. I use these. These are 5-volt 10-amp inverters. If you put one of these in each light, it should cover just about any kind of headlight build that you're doing. Taillights can push it a little bit if you're using the 5mm, so just make sure that you kind of do the math and figure out how many LEDs that you're running and how much power you're going to draw with those LEDs. I do a lot of 12-volt stuff, and then I do some 5-volt stuff with like halos to kind of supplement that. So these are more than enough, and I usually do one per light. That way I'm only running 12-volt to the headlights. But to show you kind of a comparison, so these are kind of the ones that I think everybody's a little more familiar with. This is the same. It is a 5-volt 10-amp inverter. Kind of beefy, bulky. Doesn't look great, but they worked. We used them for years. I used them for years. But then I was able to get these, and they're just so much smaller. You can snap the tabs off if you need to give it a little bit more, just make it smaller, easier to tuck it away, hide it. But I saw these on the site. They are 15 a piece versus these, smaller, about half the size of one of the metal ones. So just something to consider. I won't be using it in this harness because they are actually inside of my headlights, but a lot of builds people will want to put them in the mixed in with all this. Before I started putting them in the lights, I actually was putting them inside of the box. If you snap the tabs off, these will fit right down inside of a Ghost box. It looks like even the V2, it just, well, it is a little bit tight on the V2. So with the new V2s, the new layout, it probably won't work like that. The V1s, it was working, but doesn't look like it's going to on these. So still an option though. You can mount it on top or something like that if you want to. But I'm going to put mine inside the lights. The only downside is you do have to buy 2 for a set of lights versus just using 1 and splitting it off. But I will show you how I do that. In addition to that, you're going to need some wire. I like the wire like that. I do try to use 18 gauge as much as I can. There is some times where I have to use something a little bit thicker. My main power line will actually be a 14 gauge power line, and then being that it splits off, in most cases 18 is enough to go to each light. I don't have any issues with that. If you want to be extra careful, you can go to like a 16. Yeah, I mean, you can even go to 14. The lower the number, the bigger the gauge, the better chances are that you don't have any issues. But at a certain point, it is overkill. So you just kind of got to play it by ear and what build you're doing and how much power you're actually going to draw. And then I use 18 gauge as well for any power lines that I need to run, like if I need to run it to the controller itself or the power line to the power saver. The actual input output, I do use 14 gauge on that, and I'll show that as well. Then I just have some other various wires, different colors and stuff, and that's for my signals, so I can do the turn signals, my DRLs, the brakes, reverse in this case, and things like that. That's generally a really low amperage, so you don't need much. I use 20 gauge for that. It's a little bit easier to route. It's still good enough quality. I don't like to go to 24 gauge. 24 gauge is just, it becomes like brittle. It's just so thin. It's not great. I don't like to go that low. 20 gauge is pretty good. 24 to 22, not so much. 18, I like 18. But for signals, signal wires, 20 is fine. Something else that I use would be shrink tubing. You get various sizes. This is pretty easy to get. A 2-1 is fine in most cases. If you want to spend a little bit more, get a little bit something nicer, this is a 3-1, which means it will shrink by as much as from a 3 to a 1 ratio. And this is actually adhesive line, so it actually helps really nice because it won't move. Once you heat it up, it bonds to whatever you put it on. Nice little upgrade if you need it at times. I do use this on things throughout my builds that benefit from it, and then I use the cheaper stuff when it's just really not necessary. You also should consider something like this, the braided sleeving. It just makes the install look cleaner. You can run several wires through this, and it keeps it nice and clean and helps to just keep everything where it needs to be, so you don't have, you know, random wires trying to split off, or, you know, wrapping your entire loom in electrical tape or something like that. This is just a lot cleaner and actually a little bit easier. As for tools, you know, basic scissors, some kind of a wire stripper, screwdriver to open up your boxes and mess with the headers, and so you can run wiring. I use this for waterproofing, or when I do the epoxy, it helps it to not run out, because the stuff does actually get pretty viscous. So it helps if you put this around any areas that might leak, and it stops it from leaking. You're going to need one of these if you're using shrink tubing. You can also use a lighter if you really want to, but I like these, just a heat gun. And then solder and a soldering iron. I got my Sugan A9 right there. It's a pretty good one if you're looking for like a slightly above entry level, but not quite to the really top level Wellers and things like that. That's a really good entry level one. Sugan A9, I can change tips on the fly. It's a nice small handle to it. I've had this one for about 6 months. I use the heck out of it. I haven't had to replace a tip yet. It just works. It's fast heat up, it's fast cool down, it's automatic. As soon as I plug it in, you hear it beep. It's actually cooling down right now. When I pull it out, it'll heat up, and presets and everything. It is pretty cool. I got it on Amazon for like 130 bucks. I mean, price-wise, it was great. And then a drill. I like the speed bit, the stepper bits, like that, because you can easily drill through something like this to add a cable gland, and it'll go right up to the size that you need. And so that's the basics. Hopefully I'm not forgetting nothing. If I am, I'll have to grab it, but I think I got everything there. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and open up. I've already removed the screws on that, but go ahead and open it up. And then I'm going to remove the actual board. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a hole right in the end of it, and that's where my cable gland is going to go. It is important to make sure that you get the right orientation of the board and where the holes are. So when you put the cable gland in, you're going to want it to be on this side, not that side, because this board actually goes right up to the edge. So just keep that in mind when you're drilling the hole, that it is specific as to what side you put it on. Alright, just like that. And go one more step. There we go. Alright. So this will be the first case where I'm going to use this. I'll actually run it alongside the inside here to kind of create a seal, because that epoxy will leak. Just like that. And then for this, in order for this nut to fit in there, you're going to have to shave down the top and bottom, because it is just a little bit big for the box, but that's not too hard. I've actually got a belt sander that I'm going to use for it, but you know, you could hand sand it, or you know, Dremel, something like that. Take it down easy. So there it is, sanded down, and it'll just slide right in there. And screws right into the nut. And the way it is, it just sits right below the surface, so we can get the cap back on. And that Gorilla Glue contact adhesive will dry and create a waterproof seal inside. Next up, we're going to grab our ghost board, and we're going to run a couple wires to it. In the other video, I covered what is what on the board itself. The big thing you got is your power and ground. I only run data out. I do not run the power out because I use the power saver for that. So I will run the power through the power saver and then out to the LEDs. I'll only pull data from this, and I will also run my triggers and different modes here directly out into the controller. So I will use the 18 gauge for the power, being that I'm not actually powering anything but the Ghost controller itself. I don't need to run anything bigger. You wouldn't really be able to anyways. But that's just another reason why I do like to bypass the Ghost controller for my power. It's just safer that way. You really don't want to be running a ton of power through the circuitry if you don't have to, and you really don't have to in this case. So I just bypass it. So I got my power and ground. For this, I will run this the entire way to the lights. So you've got the side with, generally like if it's a headlight, wherever your battery is, your headlight is a lot of times right next to it, so you don't need a whole lot. But you have to consider the car. Some cars, the battery might be in the trunk, and you'll have a terminal somewhere that you have to run it to. You got to figure that out. Some cars it's on the passenger side, sometimes it's on the driver's side. So you have to kind of figure out how much length you need to go from the controller to the headlight. FRSs, they got it at the back by the firewall, and the headlights are open, you know. So just keep that in mind, how much room you're going to need. So for this one, I'm going to use about that much on the battery side, and then I'll do probably around 6 feet for the passenger side, and that should be enough to get across the car. So that'll be my passenger and driver, and those will be for the data and power. So for that, I'm going to just go ahead and strip that down, grab my data lines, which are the middle lines, and run those to the middle data pins, just like that. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and run all of my park, brakes, reverse, the show mode triggers, and both turn signals. You know, wire color is up to you. The biggest thing to remember is that you want to be able to identify which is which when you run it through your sleeving. At the other end, you know, you want to know what it is. So if you run all yellow wires, you're going to be really confused. So what I like to do, I like to run yellow for both my turns. I'll run white for the DRL. I will run red for the brake. And the reverse, I'm not exactly sure what color. I might run blue or something like that. I've never really done much with the reverses, being that the V2 is kind of new. So I'll just have to figure something out for that. And then for the extension wire, I'm just going to need a short section to run that. So you're going to have to cut the wires to the lengths of whatever you got to run it to on the car wise. With headlights, I typically run the DRL and one turn signal to the shortest run. That'll be usually the battery side headlight. And then I'll run the other turn signal to the other side of the car. So I've only got 3 that I have to run, and then I run the brake to the trigger on the power saver. But in this case, I do have 2 additional wires that I have to run for the brake and the reverse. So I'm probably going to split that. I'll run the brake line to the passenger side or non-battery side, and then I will run the reverse to the battery side. So I'll have DRL, turn, reverse, brake, turn on the other side. And then that 6th input will go short run just to the power saver. So I got my 6 wires here to run everything. Something else to consider when you are cutting for your signal wires is how the taillights are set up. In a lot of times, a lot of cases, you can run the signals directly to the lights. Like maybe the headlights or taillights that you're using have plugs that plug into the car, and then all of the contacts are inside the light. A lot of the lights that I do actually are that way, so that's really nice. I can just tap into the turn signal wire, the DRL wire, brake wires, all that stuff that's inside the lights, run them out the back of the lights using cable glands, and then create a harness using one of these that will plug into this harness. But then there's a lot of cases where people are going to have to actually tap into wires. Maybe the headlights that you got, the taillights that you got, don't actually have a harness. They have nothing. There's just bare holes on the back. There's no way for you to tap into those. If that's the case, then you're going to want to run these out the end of the loom so that you can still have a quick connect for the main wiring for the headlight, taillight, or whatever you're building, and also have these where you can label them as to which goes to which and put like some quick taps on there. I'll show you some a little bit later that I use, but something like that that'll make it still somewhat easy to install, but they will add an extra step to it, and that's, you know, kind of a caveat of some lights. They just don't ship them with the plugs in. So I'm going to go ahead and put all these on here and come right back. So I've now got everything wired up for all of my important wires, at least everything I'm running. I will once again point out I am not running power and ground from here. I'm only running the data, and the power and ground I've kept separate. Peel it back just a little bit. We will run that outside the light. And then I am running all my data lines for triggers, and then I'm running my power and ground for the actual Ghost controller. I am going to be using 12 volt on the controller, and my lights for this project are going to be both 5 volt and 12 volt. So I will have the inverters inside the lights where it will actually convert the 12 volt to 5 volt for whatever needs it. I'm not using any of the headers. In this case, if it was a Ghost Plus, this would be a good opportunity to use a switch and run that to the power saver. And what that would do is that would actually automatically trigger the power saver, where instead what we're going to be using in this case with the light, we're going to be triggering it with 3 of these wires. I'll probably use the brake and the parking light, and one of the turn signals is what I'm going to go with. And I'll even show you a trick if you need to add extra inputs to trigger the Ghost controller. I'll show you a trick on how to do that. But I'm going to go ahead and take this box now. Because of the redesign, it is really close, and it's kind of hard to put this back in because of the way that the header pins are right against there. I don't want to run these outside of the box. I'm going to actually tape off these holes so that we can pot it. But getting these in here is going to be a little tight, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim the hole just a little bit bigger around the top so that the wires can kind of like come out and then go back into the box. I'm going to use that with an ultrasonic cutter, but you could use a Dremel or you know, maybe even a file or something like that. Some kind of a cutting tool is going to be ideal. If you have an ultrasonic cutter, definitely the best way to go. I'm going to go do that now. Alright, so I have trimmed the holes a little bit bigger on these boxes so that I can now get this in here. Just like that. And it is tight fit, so, you know, something to keep in mind if you want to cut them a little bit bigger, or, you know, whatever the case be, just to get those wires to run through. So there it is, right like that. So I've got them running out the top like this, and the plan is that they're going to run through the cable gland on the end there, and they're just going to keep it a very nice clean box. I have a tape that I use, and I will show you that here in just a minute, that will cover these holes really well, and it does create a watertight seal while the epoxy dries. When the epoxy's dried, then I just peel them off, and it looks like a solid box. It looks really good. First things first, I'm going to go ahead and run the wires out of the box. Okay, so I've ran all my wires out the cable gland. The only ones that I've kept inside are the grounds. So I've kept the ground for the Ghost, and I've kept the ground for the actual data line out to the lights themselves. I've ran the power outside, so these are the 12 volt power that go to the LEDs. I've ran the power for the Ghost itself outside, and I've ran all of my signal wires outside. I did leave a little bit of slack inside, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap the appropriate wires to run to the power saver, and I'm just going to tap them inside of the box and then run that out the box and up to the power saver. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, so I have tapped in. As you can see, basically all I did, since we're going to be pulling signal from the turn signals and the DRL and the brakes, I went ahead and tapped into those wires here inside of the box, and then I run them out here, which will go to the power saver to trigger it to turn on in the event that the turn signals, the DRLs, or the brakes are activated on the car. It will turn them on so you have power to the LEDs. And that's the automatic function. That's what makes it automatically turn on. So I do that inside the box because there's still plenty of room in there. We put the cover on it. It's just less wiring that we have to do outside of the box to try to keep it as clean as we can. The cable gland's only so big, the box is only so big, so I can't do all the wiring inside, but I can do some, so I do what I can. Just kind of tighten all this stuff up as much as you can, and that'll keep it pretty clean on the inside. Next up, I'm going to grab my power line. So this is going to be the main power line that we run. You're going to want to cut however much you think you need to run from the controller to the battery. I like around 18 inches, something like that. Seems to work pretty good for most cases. I'm going to run the ground into the box. So now I have ran my power to here. So you can see all my powers actually ran to this joint right here, and I just put a shrink tube cap over top. I did use the adhesive lined one on this one so that it doesn't slide off. And that is the power to all of my LEDs. That is the power from the battery. That is the power to the Ghost controller. That is also the power I ran a line through that'll go to the power saver on top. And that is the power, the ground line for that. So ground for the LEDs, ground for the Ghost controller, ground for the power saver, and the ground from the battery is all right here. Trying to keep everything as tight as I can, so when I put the cover on, it will all fit right inside and have minimal wiring on the outside as much as possible. So I still have the power for the LEDs here. This is the power for the Ghost and the power for the power saver. Here's the power for the battery. And so I'm going to go ahead and wire that part up now. As you can see, I've already got these here, these top ones that will run to the power saver on top. And then from the power saver, it will go into these. The battery wire here will run into the power saver. So just think the power saver is a relay, so it's a switch. It just turns on and off the connection to the power line. And then the main power line here. So I'm going to go ahead and splice all that in now. Alright, so I have now added my power in and out, which is, this is the output that goes to the LEDs. This is the input power. I've spliced in my power that goes into the Ghost controller that will also come back out to go to the power saver, but it also powers the Ghost. So the power line that goes in, I got my ground lines going in, ground line coming out to actually power the Ghost itself. 4 trigger wires, the show mode trigger wire, and I'm going to put some shrink tubing over top of all of that to help clean it up a little bit and to help keep it separated so that I don't accidentally grab it for the rest of the wire harness. So it'll be just kind of like that. And it's going to go up and into the top of the power saver box. So now beyond that, what we can do is kind of separate our harness out here. Got the power line. And then you got all your short wires, which are to the closest light to your controller. And then I've got my long wires, which are going to the other light. So I just kind of separate them out like that. And then I'm going to grab my braided sleeving. And I'm going to cut the appropriate lengths to cover that up. So you're going to want to cut these braided sleeving just a little bit longer than the wires themselves, because you do have to consider the plugs that you're going to be adding to the end. So that is a little bit of an extra length. And depending on what size sleeving you have, some of it will shrink a little bit because the wires will push it out. So you got to keep that in mind, whatever size you're using. This one I'm using is it says 10, I guess, in sizing. I don't know. I honestly don't even know what the numbers are. I think they're usually like 1/4 inch or something like that. I can't remember offhand what size this one is, but just keep that in mind, whatever size you go with. So now I'm going to grab some electrical tape. I'm going to feel out my wires, try to get them as straight as I can, and then get them all flush at the end, and just tape it off right at the edge. And then from there, I will trim them even. Now I'm going to start feeding the braided sleeving over top of that. So just like that, it's over top. That's where this is going to come in. So I'm going to cut 2 sections, kind of small. They don't need to be big. Maybe like 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch. And I'm going to slide them over the sleeving. Right up to the base. And then another one about halfway up. I'll do the same on the other side, and I'll come right back. So I have now put the braided sleeving over all 3 of my extensions. So I've got the left light, right light, and the power line itself. I don't have any of the plugs on yet. I just went ahead and put the sleeving on, and then I hit this with heat to do the shrink tubing on the ends. Next, I'm going to put a larger piece of shrink tubing over top to kind of hide the wires just a little bit better. Right like that. It'll just go right over top, and it just kind of helps cover up all the wires so you don't see as much color there. So next up, we're going to go ahead and pull the sleeving back so we can get to the wires. Just like that. And then what I do is I run this up to keep it from trying to separate, and then I will use a clamp to hold it in place so it doesn't try to slide up on me. Pull the tape off, and then we have our 6 wires. Now I'm going to be using 8-pin connectors, and the reason being the gauging on these connectors is a little bit thin. It's a pretty good quality wire itself, so I haven't had any issues to speak of. But one thing that I like to do is to actually double up 2 of them. So even though I got 6 wires here, I'm going to double up 2 for my power and ground. And then the other 4 wires actually don't matter as much because they're just signal and data wires, so they don't use nearly as much power as the main one will. So what I'll do here, I'll cut these off. Cut the tips, and then And just like that, I've got my wires. Now, you got to kind of figure out which wires you want to be what color. There's a red and a black. There's a maroon. There's a white, blue, yellow, orange, and green. I usually do green for my data lines. I do red and black for my 12-volt power. And then from there, I'll do maroon as my other power. White will be my other ground. Yellow is my DRL, and blue is my turn signal. And then in the case of this light, we were doing the brake line. So the brake line I'll run to orange. So I'm going to go ahead and splice together my powers and grounds. So maroon and red. So it's kind of like a brown. I'm a little bit colorblind, so it kind of looks maroon, but I think it's actually a brown, looking at it in this light. And then there's the rest of them. So then we'll come down here, strip off a little bit of the ends of these, just like that. And then we'll go to our shrink tubing, and I'll slide the shrink tubing over top of our wires. Alright, so I got shrink tubing on all of these wires, and then these are ready to go. So I will go ahead and do all my powers and grounds. Now I remember which is which. That's the important part here. So if you're using different color wiring, you're going to want to make sure that you run it all the same. You know, connect the right wire to the right wire. There are a lot of wires here, so it can get easy. I got several whites, 2 reds, you know, so I got to keep it straight. But I know in my case, I use the 3 wires for my power, ground, and my data. So I know my red is my power, my white is my ground, green was my data, and then I know my yellow was my turn signal, and then white was my DRL, and red was my brake. So they're all spliced together now. All I gotta do is just solder each point, slide the shrink tubing over top. So just like that, everything is spliced together. So I'll go ahead and slide this up over top, just like that. So now I've got a connection going straight into the controller. It looks somewhat professional, and keeps everything nice and clean. So I will go ahead and do the other side as well. So for this other side, some of my signal wires were different. One thing to keep in mind, especially if you're using like the same size plug for both sides, like I am in this case, in the event that somebody were to plug in the wrong light to the wrong plug, you want to make sure that you're going to be okay, that you're not going to fry anything. So you want to keep a lot of the colors the same. Like in the case of power and ground, that's the big thing. Power, ground, and data. So I did stay with the same on that. I got the red and the brownish color there. I've got the black and the white for the ground, and then I've got the data for the green. Those are probably the most important ones to make sure your lights don't fry anything. The next thing up would be your reverse and turn. So turn signal, I use the same color. It is the blue. The reverse, I did use the yellow this time. You know, and this is all optional. This is just what I did. It's kind of the thing that I've been doing for a while this way, and it just works. You know, it would make sense to make the yellow, since yellow is turn, that's turn. But yeah, that's optional in how you want to run it. They're all the same wire size. It's just preference as to what you think works better. I did have the extra orange here that I'm going to cut off because I will not be using that. I'll go ahead and put the braided sleeving on now. So there is that plug all ready to go. Next is your power. So in this case, I've already shortened the power line so that I can add in my fuse holder. So I'll pull this back. Strip that. Cut that. strip that, and it will attach like that. I'm going to grab some shrink tubing. Then on the ends of these, I like to add some ring terminals. Just makes it a little bit easier to install it to the battery. Make sure they have a solid connection to it. Just keep in mind that, you know, a lot of the people that, if you're building professionally or you're trying to get into that, a lot of the people that are installing this stuff, they really do not know a lot about electrical, a lot about cars, grounds. One thing that I just, like, all the time hear people say is like, I got a solid ground, so I ran the power to the battery and I got a solid ground on the chassis. And the first thing I think is like, why did you do that? Well, for some reason, a lot of people have this assumption that the best grounds are on the chassis of the car. They don't understand the concept that all grounds go to the battery. So why put a middleman in there? Why have the potential for a bad ground chassis, or a bad chassis ground, when you can just go right to the battery with both? The ring terminals definitely help to be able to attach it to that, and that's something I always tell people. Put it straight to the battery. There's no reason not to. Especially with the power saver and stuff, you're not turning it on with a signal from, you know, DRL or anything. The power saver handles all that for you, so you don't need to run it through anything. So I am using a couple tools that I didn't mention in the beginning, as you've probably noticed now. Trying to remember everything that I use, but yeah, crimping tools they come in handy quite a bit. So there's quite a few different ones out there, different styles depending on what you're doing, JSTs and stuff. I've got some that even have like interchangeable crimps on there. Those are pretty cool. You know, wire strippers, there's quite a few of them out there. I find that these seem to be more universal. They'll fit just about any kind of wire, and they're adjustable. There are some that are a little beefier that last longer, but they don't quite work on every kind of wire. So I have both, and I kind of flip between them for depending on what I'm cutting and what I need. Clamps, they're cheap enough, but as you can see, I mean, it's really nice for like the braided sleeving because it holds it back so it doesn't try to slide up on you while you're trying to work on wiring. So that's really nice for that. I like these kind of ring terminals because they have shrink tubing on them. So just like that, you hit them with the heat and it bonds around very nicely to the wire, so they're really not easy to pull off, not easy to fall off. They seem to stick pretty well. I will add a link to my Amazon channel that will have links to all the stuff that I use, stuff like these, different kind of crimping tools that I like, that have worked well for me, just to try to make it a little bit easier to find stuff. Good solder. I've had a lot of people with soldering in the past. When I first started trying to solder, you know, I was using lead-free. Don't use lead, lead's bad, be careful, you know. Honestly, you want leaded. It just works. Lead-free, it's a pain in the butt to work with. If you're new to soldering and you're trying to get into it, you're just going to intimidate yourself because it's not good stuff. So I'll put a link for the stuff that I use, the soldering iron that I use, and that's a little bit more of a premium, you know, 130 bucks. You can get a solid soldering iron for like 20 bucks. It won't have a base or anything to it, but it'll work. So it depends how much you're doing. If you're doing a lot, invest in yourself, invest in your business, invest in your future, because if you can make your life easier as a builder, it's worth doing. If you're doing this on a weekend for your own car, you're not planning on doing this professionally, it's not worth spending that much money. But, you know, it's all based on the situation. I'm sure plenty of people could argue that somebody like me should probably have spent $500 or $600 on a soldering iron, and I could totally accept that too. Invest in yourself. It just makes sense in the long run to make your life easier. So, now we're going to go over to the power saver, which is pretty much the only thing left. One thing on this that you're going to have to keep in mind, you're going to have to trim a little bit of this lip right here so that it will fit around that screw, the nut that we added in there, because it won't actually seat fully unless you trim that out. So I will actually do that here in a little bit. Power saver. So the way they're shipped, you just have to remove the 4 screws on the top. There is a QR code here that you can scan, which is a separate video that just goes over the power saver itself and the basic wiring. I'm pretty much going to be covering all of that here as far as what goes where. I'm also going to be covering how to add a 4th or possibly more trigger to it. They come with 3. The main intent was to be mostly for headlights. And now that I'm getting into taillights a little bit more, I'm kind of wishing we would have added a 4th one, but it is what it is. But it's not hard to add a 4th one. The important part is that the most difficult stuff is done with the design of the board itself. Because there are ways that you can kind of make this yourself, but you can have a ton of components, you can have a lot of time invested in doing it, and that's why these are made. So this is your seal. So you're just going to run that around the top, and then you're just going to trim off the excess. Keep in mind that you do want to get this as close as you can, because this is the seal, so when you pour in the resin for the epoxy, the potting compound, any cracks in this that aren't quite right is a potential for something to leak. So you want to try to make this fit just right up against it, so that it's almost like one complete seal. As far as the box goes, so we've got, these come in anti-static bags. You've got the remote and the power saver itself. On the power saver, you have your relay. This is your main power and ground, or power input and output. So you got a power in, which is in the middle, and your power out, which is in the bottom down here. So the NO is your output, and the COM is your input. You can actually flip that. If you did it backwards, it's not going to kill you. The important part is that you do the bottom one and then the middle one, not the top one. The top one is not used. On this side, this is your power and ground. You'll see the plus sign, which is your power, which is on the bottom side, and then the top side is your ground, and that's a constant power. So this is the power that's flipped on and off via the relay, and this is your constant. This is a 30 amp relay, so it can run a lot. Underglow, headlight. I've had people ask, can I use it on multiple lights, multiple controllers? You can. You can use this on multiple BlueGhozt controllers, multiple SP and BlueGhozt. You can control a whole bunch of 12-volt power. Just keep in mind that it will all either be on or off. You can't separately, individually control each controller. So it will all either be on or it will all be off. You also have to keep in mind that that means that you're going to have to do some fancy wiring to make sure that you run all of your power through here, even if you have multiple controllers. It can be done. 30 amps is a heck of a lot. But also keep in mind your triggers. You've only got 3 triggers, and granted, I will show you how to expand on that. But if anything triggers it, it's all or nothing. So you can use it. In general, for me, I'm going to use it 1 per controller, just to simplify things for the customer, whoever's installing them on their car. But that's preference. 30 amps, plenty. It'll take it. Then you have this pin header here. On the top is your output. So this is a trigger that comes from the RF board and goes out to the Ghost controller to trigger your show modes. So this here is low amperage, so you don't want to plug anything into it like your Demon Eyes or anything like that. Anything external, if you really want to use this output to be something to control like an underglow or something like that, you'll want to use a relay. So you can go from this to trigger a relay, and then the relay can control the actual power output. But this output is a low amperage output, so you do not want to control things like that. This one here, yeah, you 30 amps all day long, whatever you want. As far as expanding on these triggers, what we're going to be using is diodes, Zener diodes. They're really small, one-way circuits. So the power can go one way, it cannot go back the other way. And that will prevent you from cross connecting wiring. So if you connect two wires together, they can either one send a signal, but neither one can feed a signal back through the other wire. So what I'm going to do is I will take this top box and put it over the wiring that we have on there right now, just like that. And that way, when we're all done, we can just slide it right over top. Then I'm going to take this box, and that should work. Alright. So I went ahead and wired in the Zener diodes so you can get an idea. So if you look at them like that, you've got the little silver cap on them, and that is the direction. So it will go this way. That's the way the signal goes. It cannot go back that way. So I've got my two signal wires here that I want to turn into one so I can go to the board, and I've got it just going like that. And then I'm going to put the shrink tubing right over top, and then I'll put another shrink tubing back over. That way it isolates them and makes sure that none of them touch each other. This single output will go to the board here. I've already ran my other three outputs, and I've ran my power and ground, and I've ran my main power line to the, you can see it there, to that side. So now I've got all the wiring ran. I went ahead and trimmed the top to the ghost box so that it would fit on that back nut, screwed it down. I've now got the power saver in its box, and I will pull the cover up over top of it. And there it is. So the harness will be like that. I will put the potting compound through this hole in the top. It's actually not too bad. If you get the mixing cups, you can just pour it right in there, wipe off any little excess that might leak out, or if you miss the hole or whatever. As far as the bottom goes, I will just unscrew the screws, pull the cap off, pour it right in, and they will fill up the container. One thing I did forget to show in the video, I do actually put more of the Gorilla Glue inside of this nut on the outside before I fasten it down for the cable gland, and try to get it in between the wires and stuff, and that just kind of creates a little more bond. This potting compound will try to leak out this side if you don't. As far as these holes go, I use a metal tape just like this. I'll cut it to size, I'll put it over top of the holes, and that will prevent it from leaking out on those. Don't try electrical tape. It will leak through electrical tape, so don't try that. There might be some other tapes that you can try that'll work, but I like that stuff. It does work and it never leaks. And then once that's all done, you can secure the box on top in several different ways. You could do two-sided tape, or you could do something else. Zip ties, maybe like through the holes and then around the top. I like to put a screw through right here and into this top hole, and it will actually secure it down. And then on the back side, this wire secures that down so it won't go anywhere. You can add a maybe a zip tie on the back side just to secure it from trying to spin a little bit, but it then secures it to itself, keeps it nice small box, really clean. You got your power saver, you got everything in there. You have your power and ground with the fuse holder. You have your first connector, your second connector. The way I'll usually do these, just zip tie it right like that. You send it to the customer, they get a controller that looks like that, they're happy as can be. It's clean, it's easy, cut it, install it, everything's good. As I mentioned, in the event that you do have to run your signals separately from the controller, maybe it's not on the headlights itself, you'll have them coming out the plug. So instead of running it to the plug itself, you just run them up alongside of the braided sleeving and then coming out of the right beside the plug here. So it'll be just separate pigtails, just something kind of like that. So it'll be coming off, and then you'll add a couple wire taps and labels to let people know what is what, turn signal and all that stuff. If I'm doing it like this, I'm always going to use yellow for turns, white for DRLs, red for brakes. They're kind of more standardized colors, so it's a little bit less confusing if somebody's familiar with lighting. They might see those colors and associate them without reading labels. So if you use that kind of color standards, you won't have those. Well, you're less likely to have those issues. So just keep that in mind. In this case, I was able to run it all through with the controller, so I won't have to worry about that. Something I also didn't do during this was testing, you know, as you're moving and going along. I've made adapters using these where I can plug in, and then on the other end I've got like a 3-pin JST output so that I can plug in a halo and be like, okay, cool, my 5 volt's good. Or if I'm running 12 volt in this case, I can plug in a 12 volt strip and just be like, okay, cool, the 12 volt's good, I got power, I've got my, you know, whatever the case. Just keep in mind, these are exposed wires, and so if you do that, you can buy an extra one of these to be able to test the end of it when you're all done without, you know, potentially frying your headlights. You can just fry like a halo or something if you did something wrong. Keep in mind that any exposed pins touch each other, they can, you know, fry some stuff. So you want to be careful when you're making it. I generally run my 12 volt, and then I'll run my the JST output so I can plug up and test everything. I'll test the signal indicators to see if they light up on the app, to make sure that, you know, when I probe each one, they are doing everything they're supposed to be doing. And then on the other side of it, it's pretty self-explanatory. You got this end of it that'll go to the headlight or taillight. And then you use the sleeving as well and wires to run off of that into the light and then run those to the appropriate places. I have one video already that kind of goes over that. I'm planning on doing another video more in depth on the headlight itself, what's inside, how I run wires, how I mix and match 12 volt and 5 volt. As I said, I do have one that's called Wiring Basics, I can't even remember the name of it. I'll try to put a link on the video. But it goes over the basics of the internals of the light and splitting power between 5 volt and 12 volt and making sure that each device gets what they need, and then data lines and all that. But I will try to do a new video at some point here in the future to kind of go over a little bit more in depth on that, as well as soldering some of the rigid strips to make different shapes and things. They don't just have to be a straight strip. You can make curves and things like that. That works out pretty good. So a lot of other videos that I want to get done. Just kind of working through little bit by little bit to add some more videos that hopefully can help you guys out. Things that I've learned over the years. And learn from a lot of people. But hopefully that all made sense. If you have any questions, be sure to reach out. Probably the best way to contact me is through Instagram or Facebook Messenger. The links are on our YouTube page as well as our website. And we will try to respond to any questions you guys have. Thanks for watching.